why don't we go ahead and get started? Oh, what a lovely dog. Anyway, thank you for joining us today. I'm Cliff Lynch. I'm the director of the Coalition for Networked Information, and you've joined us for one of the project briefing sessions during the first day of week 3 of our fall 2020 virtual member meeting. Just to refresh your memory, week 3 focuses on issues around infrastructure, technology, standards, and to my mind, this really fits in strongly with some of the infrastructure kind of themes. This is about, how we organize ourselves as a community. A few logistical things. We are recording this and we will be making it public shortly after. There is closed captioning. Please use it if it's helpful. We have got a chat and please feel free to use that as we go. There's also a Q&A tool and you can use that to pose questions at any time during the discussion. And after we hear from all of our panelists, Roger Schonfeld and Sara Rouhi will help moderate a Q&A session to round out the panel. We have quite a wonderful set of folks with us today. Roger Schonfeld from Ithaka S&R is going to be moderating this. And we have Sara Rouhi from PLOS, Kamran Naim from CERN, Sharla Lair from LYRASIS, and Emily Farrell from the MIT Press are all with us. And I'm going to let Roger sort of frame this rather than wasting time trying to do it myself. But I think that you'll find this to be a very timely discussion. We really are in a period, I think, where library publisher partnerships are being reshaped in some quite extraordinary ways, at least with some publishers. And I think we have several publishers with us here who have been among those at the forefront of innovation. So I think this will be a very interesting discussion. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being with us for this. And with that, let me turn it over to Roger.
Super, thanks so much, Clifford. And it's such an honor to be part of this this really all-star panel. My fellow panelists are going to share a little bit about each of the models that they have developed and are developing with the community around various kinds of partnership models. What we're hoping to do here is, what we're planning to do is to hear from each of the 4 other panelists for about 5 minutes each. We've rigidly restricted them to 3 slides each. And after about giving each of them a chance to speak to some of the issues that are specific to their program, to their businesses, as the case may be. And then what we're going to try to use most of our time for, in about 20 minutes, we'll reserve then about more than half of the remaining session, to a discussion among the panelists and a set of questions that we hope will draw some really interesting linkages across these individual initiatives to try to explore the basis for, as the title of our session is, for how library spending power can result in collective action as we look at some of the new publishing and collaboration models that are developing. I think I'm not really going to try to offer much more framing than that to get started. I want us to have our panelists a chance to get started. Emily's going to kick us off, and then we'll go around the group from there. And I'll come back in about 20 minutes to help with Q&A. Emily?
Great, thanks so much, Roger, and thanks, Clifford and CNI. I have already flouted the rules and I have 4 slides, so you'll have to forgive me, but I will move through them reasonably fast. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the open access books model that MIT Press is working on. We've started to talk to libraries about it, but the model is still in development, and we'll be working with libraries through next year with a plan to open academic books, monographs and edited book collection from 2022. Early last year, we received funding from the Arcadia Fund to work on developing a business model for open access books that would allow us to more comprehensively open our books rather than just finding funding for individual titles here and there. So the plan is to be able to open the around 90 titles per year that we publish in our front list academic books. The plan with this model, direct to open, is that it will be a library collective action model where libraries will open the front list and then also be provided with term access as an incentive to the corresponding back file of the collection that they support. And one of the interesting features is that when libraries commit to the model, even if it's not successful, they will still get access to this back file. The idea is that we are planning to cover partial direct costs from our current monograph sales, which we realize through conventional channels. So that's about $1.6 million. Next slide, please. And the model itself, the collections we're offering 2 collections, an art and design and STEM collection and a humanities and social sciences collection. And part of the reason that we've decided to do that is to allow partial funding for this model. So if we don't get all the funding to open the full model, the full collection, we'll at least be able to potentially open one model if we only get one collection, if we only get half of the funding we need. But built into this is also the fact that if there's surplus support commitments for each collection, that will cascade into the next collection. So we'll still always be aiming to reach the 1.6 threshold rather than trying to get greater revenue on top of that. And any excess commitments will then be put towards or applied towards future fees in future years. Next slide, please. So the model itself, in terms of trying to approach access and equity and access to this content, there isn't currently a great comprehensive model that manages to provide access to books. Some of the models that we'll hear about today with journals have been more successful, but books are still something more of a challenge. So this model will allow us to more comprehensively open our academic books from 2022, and we'll be doing that annually. So we'll be able to reassess each year how the model's working, whether it's working, and take into account library feedback. We also, in considering equity in the pricing structure, tried to take as much into account as we could. So we wanted to not just take FTE into account, but also institution type, size, and as well as collection budget. So we have quite a number of tiers rather than just the sort of more, say, standard 5 tiers. To quickly answer Peter's question, I'm talking about, there's always something of a challenge when we're talking about books with monographs versus academic books broadly. We are looking at monographs as a very large category, so we're not excluding edited books in this. We're looking at single authored books, monographs, but also our edited academic books. In the fee structure, we're also trying to, at the moment, draft pricing specifically targeting research for life institutions, low and middle income country pricing as well. And then the model itself as a collective model, because we're looking to bring a large number of institutions on board to support this model, it brings the pricing down for everybody that's supporting the model. It avoids the burden of BPCs, book processing costs or charges for authors. And it really brings the price per collection down drastically below a market cost. So we're looking at the pricing being at about 37 cents to just over $2 per title in these collections with this model. And another feature of the model is that institutions can actually choose to buy more shares than just a single share to cover their own institution. And we're also in discussion with a couple of libraries to come in as major sponsors. So in the first year, to help subsidize some of the other tiers, perhaps for smaller institutions. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges in considering how we're working with libraries on getting this model, moving this model forward, is in sort of shifting approach. So far, we have been working on with our ebooks on our own platform that we launched last year. And it's very much a standard model where we're presenting pricing, we're using consortia to put together discounting. And this model really is a shift in that there's a shift from market thinking towards a collective action approach. So we are really hoping that we can get beyond libraries asking for discounting and to really work with regional consortia to move beyond buying club type mentality. So really it is about coming together to support this model collectively. And in thinking about that, we really have tried to build this into the model itself, and to try to get past some of the challenges of business thinking in working with libraries. So that part of that is making sure we're working with the lowest pricing we can. The fact that we are going to offer access to the backlist regardless of if the model is successful, as long as libraries do commit. So it's a fantastic incentive. And we're also, with the fixed financial target, we're really not asking for anything beyond the set amount that we have to cover partial direct costs. And we've also looked at the model, and we know that the value in the backlist will sustain for 20 years. So some of those features help us to sort of move beyond some of the challenges that might be there in terms of this shift from market thinking to a collective action model. And that's it from me for the moment until we get to the Q&A. I am now going to pass it on to Sharla Lair from LYRASIS.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'm going to start where we're inequitable. Most mechanisms to support funding of open access are inequitable. This is because many of the existing business and funding mechanisms that are implemented to sustain open access publishing often replicate the same systems built mostly by commercial entities, whereby it assumes only a small and better resource subset is interested or even able to invest. Because of this assumption, marketing, education, outreach about open access excludes a significant portion of the community that has been supporting scholarly publication all of this time. So for an example, many of the current models and infrastructures that support open access funding assume that only large, well-resourced research institutions want or are able to participate. The funding models built on this assumption leave out most teaching and learning institutions who have been participating and acquiring much of the same scholarly content under paywalled models for decades. And although they do not typically have strong research output, these institutions still have a vested interest in providing access to scholarly content to support their missions for teaching and learning. Nothing has changed in an OA world. In fact, they value the content enough to continue the status quo of acquiring it through legacy subscription and purchase models, often because very few have been offered an open alternative that they can participate in. So these inequities do not just exclude libraries that represent teaching and learning institutions, other stakeholders in our community, such as provost and research offices and department chairs, as well as public libraries and museums who are positioned to serve the commons and general public, are rarely considered as collaborators to sustain open access programs. By building models and funding mechanisms that exclude other agencies, institutions, or organizations from collaboratively funding open scholarly content, then the financial burden falls on a very small subset of organizations with shrinking budgets to support the entire transition to open access. The continuation of the status quo systematizes acting in solitude, forcing those who do invest in or fund open access to focus on the local needs over the global due to smaller budgets, competing dollars, and little opportunities to make their dollars go further. Focusing on one individual entity or subset at a time causes silos of action. This is the opposite direction from the coordinated action necessary to transition and sustain open scholarly publishing. This solitary form of action leads to a lack of diversity in content, publishers, authors, readers, learners, and ultimately society. Open access is not sustainable in such a world, and we need a radical new form of cooperation that facilitates the community we want to be. Next slide. LYRASIS, in cooperation with several librarians and mission-aligned publishers, are developing a new values-based program to do just that. This new program is a community-driven framework that enables multiple stakeholders to efficiently and strategically evaluate and collectively fund open access content initiatives. We are calling it the LYRASIS Open Access Community Investment Program. It will be designed to equitably connect multiple stakeholders in the scholarly publishing landscape, including funders, institutions, libraries, authors, and editors. It will facilitate an experimental and incubation space for emerging open access funding and business models, centralize the administration and funding of open access initiatives at multiple scales, and make transparent to the community at large who is participating in each investment community. It will provide a funding hub for more bespoke programs, output from smaller publishers, and niche scholarly output in order to maintain diversity of scholarship. It will also enable investors to strategically fund individual programs or distribute funds to multiple programs that align with their missions all in one place, increasing efficiencies and convenience. And it will help investors put their money where their mission is by encouraging mission matching between the investor and the program in order to build and maintain trust and integrity. Before the end of the year, LYRASIS, in partnership with Transitioning Society Publications to Open Access, will announce a pilot to test the viability, scalability, and sustainability of the proposed program. We're beginning this pilot with a Society OA journal published by a U.S. university press needing sustainability funding, as well as another journal leaving a large commercial publisher seeking funding to flip to open access. We will explore a community-vetted crowdfunding approach by having the publishers answer various criteria questions on behalf of the participating journal. The answers to these criteria will be the basis for investment decisions by investors such as libraries, but also any other organizations who wish to participate. Next slide. So I think the biggest challenge for this is that we have to meet people where they are, and people are all over the place in this space, especially in the language we use to talk about open access and sustainable publishing. We communicate under the assumption that we all have a shared language and understanding, but I would argue that most people in this space either do not have a shared definition of these words, and more folks than we realize do not even know what some of these words really mean, like open access, publishing, how money flows through the supply chain, and what is a supply chain? We talk about infrastructure, sustainability, principles, assessing value, profit, margin, tax status, is for-profit or not-for-profit good. Being able to communicate with a shared understanding of the words we use provides a critical platform for facilitating problem solving across our communities. Once we agree on the meaning of the words we all use, then we can start asking better questions, because right now the questions we are asking may not be helping us learn anything new. In many cases, people form a solution in their mind and then ask questions that validate what they believe to be true. In other words, their questions are solutions masquerading as questions. And again, we're not learning anything new. One key is to pause and maybe ask ourselves, what assumptions am I making? What do I believe to be true? Then start considering the possibility that our assumptions aren't true. We do not know what we do not know. Our questions can be powerful tools for learning, but only if they challenge our assumptions rather than confirm our beliefs. Only at this point can we start making visible the invisible. By meeting people where they are, using community to level the playing field of understanding, we ask better questions and we start to make visible the invisible. We can more clearly identify and name the systems that separate us. I fear that as we attempt to normalize open access, especially now when resources are dwindling, we are all in danger of replicating the legacies and broken systems that are just no longer sustainable in order to maintain convenience and efficiencies. It's humbling to realize that many of the challenges that we all face were actually due decisions that we made and to continue to make as a community. We have met the enemy and it is us. But I have hope. We must acknowledge the flaws in our current systems and admit that our current system isn't right or even best. It's just the system we're used to, one preferred and advanced by a minority, not the majority. If this is indeed the case, then we have an opportunity to advance a different reality, one that requires a more effective connection infrastructure that facilitates sustainable funding of open access content by leveling the playing field so that the multiple stakeholders can equitably participate in our shared scholarly communication community. And so that's it for me. And I believe we're moving on to Sara next.
Yeah, thanks, Sharla. I always get so fired up after you talk about this. It's such a great presentation. Thanks for the quick 5-minute version, and I've been tweeting it as well. Hi everyone, I'm Sara from PLOS. We've just launched our community action publishing model, which some of you may be aware of. The aims of this model. It feels pretty timely. I'm not sure if folks saw the recent article in Forbes that came out, I think it was yesterday, around the exclusivity, exclusionary practices of the highly selective journals. So there's I'll pop that into the chat when I finish here. But basically the aim of this model is an experiment on PLOS's side to find a way to sustainably cover the costs of our open access, highly selective journals, PLOS Medicine and PLOS Biology, the first two journals that we publish, kind of our flagships, to sustainably cover their costs with a capped margin by equitably distributing costs amongst the stakeholders that engage with the content the most. And for now, the proxy we're using for those who engage the most are those who publish the most frequently in these journals, either as affiliated with the lead authors publishing in these journals or as affiliated with the co-authors, the contributing authors. What has set this, I actually credit to Roger for coming up with this list, because I had to come up with it in response to a comment on a Scholarly Kitchen post. It was super helpful just to repurpose it. But what makes the model different is, I think if you were to reduce it down to a couple things, it's really the transparency that we've tried to bring to the process in disclosing the amount of cost we want to cover, in disclosing the operating margin of 10% that we want to reinvest in the journal, in disclosing the process of coming to the fee structure, making that fully available on our website. And then engaging over the past 6 or 7 months with funders, consortia, libraries, many folks on this call, on what was working and what wasn't with the way we had conceived of the model originally, and then getting it to where we find it now in terms of how we're publicly presenting it, with a full commitment to transparency around what works, to transparency when we change things or have to pull back on things because they're not working. I think kind of this good faith effort to collaborate with library partners and other stakeholders to try something new, understanding that not all of it's going to work, but ideally hoping to get to the same collectively community-driven outcome together, for lack of a better way of describing it. And there's a lot more information on our site about how that's going to work. So really, in terms of thinking about equity, my kind of remit at PLOS since I've joined has really been to be thinking about models that really facilitate a truly sort of open to read, open to publish, and I would add open to use, in the kind of open science best practices vernacular, for lack of a better way of thinking about it. Whether you are a researcher, a practitioner, a reader, just a user of any sort, when you come to a scholarly output, you should be able to read it. You should be able to use the content, whether it's the data, the code, the supplemental information, and you should be able to publish when you need to, as you need to, assuming you meet the standards that your community requires without cost barriers. So as I'm thinking about new business and talking with folks like the people on this panel, I try to think around the questions of how to, equity, the communities we serve, and sustainability. What does that Venn diagram look like, such that we can make sure we're removing barriers that, as Sharla, stated very eloquently, we ourselves have built. PLOS particularly, we were amongst the first to make APCs something that works. How are we bringing down those barriers while also being kind of prudent stewards of our nonprofit mission and making sure, you know, we can be around to fight another day. So those are kind of the three pieces that we think about when we use equity. And you know, I credit to Roger again for pushing all of us on, you know, equity is getting thrown around so much. How do we make sure it's not a throwaway line, but something that's really critical to how these models succeed? And a big component of that is accepting that these models are not going to be about revenue maximization. They're going to be about cost recovery, transparency, and collaboration with the entities that are willing to participate in them. Sorry, I keep moving the slides in the wrong direction. The person who is doing that is me on all these presentations, so sorry. In terms of the challenges, I really appreciate Sharla's point on are we speaking the same language? It has been an eye-opener for me to sit down with institutions that I consider extremely savvy and extremely knowledgeable in the scholarly communications kind of ecosystem, and to share with them, you know, let me tell you how much a submissions platform costs to maintain. Let me tell you how much it takes for a publisher like PLOS with no historical infrastructure around tracking counter data. Let me tell you what that costs. Let me tell you what it costs to create a sales and partner support infrastructure when you don't have one. Those things are real. Those things cost money, and you know, there's always the eternal debate of, well, what do publishers do anyway? You know, where does all this money go to? I had to have that conversation with every partner I've engaged with in the past year and a half. Because PLOS has never had these things, so I've witnessed us trying to build them and create them. But also, you know, when you go to an institution in this climate asking for new money, you need to be able to answer those questions. And so, you know, exhortation to library partners, and I can name a couple libraries that have been incredibly great at showing me how this is done. You can ask, you know, you can ask, what does this APC pay for, right? The whole Plan S price transparency effort was an effort to get publishers to ask that question. You can ask why they pay for certain services and not others. You can ask, you know, why is this service, for example, why won't PLOS do X, Y, or Z service for me? And I can tell you, well, this is what it costs, and we'd rather spend our money a different way unless you want to pay for it, right? There's lifting the lid, I think, in the spirit of the assumptions that we make. Again, tying back to Sharla's points around this stuff doesn't need to be a secret. And the more that we're kind of willing to share, I think the more we build back the trust that's really been eroded in the course of library publisher engagement. And then it really allows a fair conversation for when, you know, I have to turn to, you know, Sharla or MIT or another institution and say, I can't give you that thing you want. It's because we've explained, you know, let me give you the whole picture of what our ecosystem looks like. And suddenly it becomes a lot more understandable. It's not a publisher just trying to pull a fast one on you. There's a legitimate disconnect there that the publisher as a partner is trying to highlight. I want to flag consistency because I think that's really important. Emily alluded to this. Sharla, you can jump in and tell me if I'm wrong on this. Every library wants like a sustainable, community-driven approach until it costs them more money than what they're paying now, right? And then suddenly I want to have a transactional relationship where you give me the best deal and it doesn't matter what other people pay. And the reality that we're facing with particularly the PLOS cap is we are sticking to our guns on the transparency and the consistency. So, you know, for every library that has committed, and we have had tremendous uptake on the model, there's a whole bunch of other libraries saying, well, we want to participate, but can we just pay less? And the answer, you know, from our perspective has to be no. We need everyone to give the amount that they're stipulated to give. If you don't, then other institutions pay more because it is a collective, and accepting that we have to be consistent on our side, and ideally, you know, institutions have to bring that same consistency as well. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'll hand it over to Kamran. Kamran, I'll try not to mess up my slide advancing here. Sorry.
Oh no, it's not to worry. So I just want to start off by thanking Cliff and Diane from CNI for having us, and for this excellent and most admirable group of fellow panelists. I'm so excited and inspired by the work that you guys do every day, and it's a pleasure to and an honor to be included with you today. So I'm going to talk about something that isn't particularly all that innovative because it's been around for a while. But my main role right now at CERN and as the head of open science, particularly on the open access sphere, is managing the operations for Scope 3, which is the sponsoring consortium for open access publishing and particle physics. For those of you who don't know, I mean, I'm guessing most people are aware of this effort, but it's a collective action effort, which is pretty global. We have 3,000 libraries and across 43 countries. It's been operational since 2014, and in that time, we've published now almost 39,000 articles open access, covering 90% of the discipline in high energy physics and 11 of the most important journals. One of the really interesting things about Scope 3, and one of the reasons why I was delighted to take the job at CERN and to be working on it, is that it really has aligned with values that I've espoused for many years and that you've heard on this panel about enabling open access that is barrier-free for authors. So we want to be able to create systems that don't exacerbate existing inequities in scholarly publishing. In the past, researchers in developing parts of the world were unable to access content because it was just too expensive for them to subscribe to journals. And the predominance of the APC model has led to, with the exception of waiver systems, has led to potential for exclusion of authors who aren't able to afford to publish their work. And so I've been really interested in developing and working on collective approaches, and worked with Rain Crow and at Annual Reviews on the Subscribe to Open program, which espouses very similar values. I think what Scope 3 demonstrates is that it's not only possible, global collaboration can be achieved towards these goals. It's sustainable. So we're now in the 7th year of Scope 3. That although there's only 43 countries participating, we're able to enable authorship from over 120 countries. And we're able to also do it at a cost that's pretty darn effective. Now, Scope 3 isn't premised on paying APCs per se, but our average cost per article, if you take the total budget and divide it by the number of articles we publish, is around 1,100 euros, about $1,200 per article. So if you could move forward, please. So now you may have seen this slide in previous presentations about Scope 3. I'm just going to talk about it very briefly. But at the outset of the program, the way that Scope 3 worked was that CERN, acting on behalf of the consortium, entered into contracts with publishers to effectively underwrite the major journals in the discipline to publish high energy physics content open access. So for researchers, they would submit their content to the publishers. It would be published OA. And then the publishers were required to issue reductions. So a reduction on the subscription costs for the commensurate amount of those journals within their portfolios. And the idea was that reduction that would then be issued to libraries would then be paid back to Scope 3 in terms of membership fees. There was, we also received support from a number of funding agencies, and CERN puts in about 10% of the budget, but that these savings would become essentially part of the mechanism that Scope 3 used to develop its budget, and then use that to collectively negotiate with publishers to deliver open access. Now that was developed and has been operating since 2014, but effectively now the content that is in Scope 3 is open access. So now the question is, the subscription reductions have become this kind of artifact of history, right? It's been a number of years now. A lot of, like people move on in libraries, people move on in publishers. A lot of this sense of, this savings that was issued in 2014 to libraries has kind of kind of been lost. So how do we, now that we have a set of open content, how do we continue to sustain this and to do it in ways that are equitable for the institutions that participate? So if we could head to the next slide. Oh, there we go. So the way that Scope 3 effectively works is that, and I can talk a little bit more about this slide if anyone has any questions, but I'm just going to just state the general principle, is that we work on the fraction of authorship in articles in our discipline. So what we do is we look at every single article that's published in our discipline over a 2-year period, look at the author list, determine from that author list what country they are from, and if they have affiliations in multiple countries, we take the country that has the highest GDP, and we add up what we call article fractions, and then assign them per country. So for the total body of literature over a 2-year period in our discipline, we calculate the fraction of the research that belongs to that particular country. What we then do is, once we have that total fraction for the country, we multiply that by the total budget of Scope 3, and that becomes how much a country is then expected to pay. We also ask our participating countries to add an additional 10% on their budget to cover the publishing for countries that can't reasonably be expected to contribute to Scope 3. So places like Yemen or Niger, where we have supported authors from all over the world to publish their work for free. So this is the way that we kind of think about how we can develop a sustainable, equitable model where people pay for the services that are delivered to them, which are effectively publishing services, based on how much they use it. So their authorship in the journals. And so if we could just move to the final slide. The issues that that Scope has kind of associated with this model is that, as I mentioned already, the journals would transition to OA in 2014. The savings are this kind of artifact of history. What some people don't necessarily consider is, because we lock in pricing, our contracts with publishers for various phases, we lock them in for 3-year periods at a time. That means that a library's contribution into Scope 3 remains steady for that phase. So content that may have otherwise been a subscription journal, which libraries are very familiar with the fact that there are annual price increases that can be in the range of 3+%. There's a savings that's also achieved in that way, but isn't really thought of when evaluating the value that something like Scope 3 delivers. Demonstrating continued value to the community is challenging, particularly for non-participants, because even obviously, like I said, there's 120 countries that have authors, only 44 participate. So how do you convince non-participants to join? And in a way, so what we do is we demonstrate the value by the number of authors that have contributed and been able to publish their work BC free. We are asked a lot for usage and download statistics by libraries to justify payments to the Scope 3 fund, but because those are managed by the publishers, and we're in essence an intermediary, that's something that we don't really get. That's something I would like to see, though, in the future is, I do think that when it comes to OA and collectively funded OA, this notion of expanded readership, particularly comparing to the subscription model, is one that I think does have a lot of value, and something that was noticed in annual Subscribe to Open program, which was the content that was originally paywalled was only available to about 3,000 subscribing institutions. And then once it was opened, 8,000 to 10,000 institutions around the world were suddenly using content. So attracting new participants and contributors is challenging. A lot of people talk about, when we get into collective funding models, they talk about the free rider problem, and that support will dwindle over time and people will withdraw. And I think Scope 3 really demonstrates the counterpoint to that actually, free writing has never been a problem for Scope 3, and that in fact, our numbers are increasing. So just in the last week or so, we had a new consortium join the Irish Research e-Library IRL has just joined Scope 3, so we have a new member country, new member institutions who previously have always benefited from the free publishing services and are now happy and willing to fund this kind of a model. So I think collective approaches are obviously viable. Scope 3 is demonstrating that. We're able to continue to demonstrate the services of high quality publishing, OA, APC free, and it's just really encouraging to see a range of different approaches that align with that set of values of delivering global equitable models that are not exclusionary. And I'll wrap it up there.
That's just wonderful. Thank you, Kamran, and thank you, everyone. So I want to really encourage. We have about 20 minutes for discussion, and I want to, really encourage all the participants to put questions into the Q&A box. I'll be happy to ask them on your behalf. But I want to start with a couple of questions, and maybe we can even take the slide down, Sara. I think that way we can really see all the panelists better. Thanks. And I'll ask just a series of questions to get us started. When we're looking at these new and I think even not so new models, all of which are innovative and trying to really build out openness, build in openness into our practices and our assumptions, think differently, explore new opportunities. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of creativity and innovation that's represented in this panel. And I just want to sort of, first off, and most importantly, just take a moment to really recognize that. I think we're really looking at some innovators and leaders in this space here. And so, even if I have questions about some of the specifics, and I may ask some questions that are a little bit challenging, I just want to take a moment to really recognize at the highest level, like this is the leading edge of creativity and innovation, and we should really celebrate that and try to, both respect it and for all of us, it's an opportunity to learn from some real leaders in the community. So now to dig into some questions. So I'd like to understand a little bit better. One of the things that's really challenging and important about any business, any product, is that you have to generate not just enough money to cover your costs of doing your business this year, but you have to generate the resources to continue to reinvest in the business itself. Whether that be to make a major capital investment, to maintain and rewrite the code that's underneath some of your systems, whether it be the need to acquire content next year. All of those things are things that require reinvestment in the business. And so I'd like to understand, how do you think about the way that operating margin works for your businesses? Are you trying to break even? Are you trying to enable reinvestment over time? Is there a level of reinvestment that feels fair and equitable, or how do you think about that need to do more than just break even, but actually maintain and reinvest? And anyone who'd like should feel free to jump in there.
I could jump in really quickly and just say that I think that's a really interesting question, and I think in part, one part of the answer is that I think all publishers, like many businesses or companies, are balancing a portfolio in some way. So certainly for MIT Press, what we're talking about here is ensuring access to our academic books, while also continuing other parts of our publishing program in different ways, and sort of looking to support those in the ways that need to be customized for those particular areas of the program. So when it comes to monographs, there's a clear need where there's value in the long form work, but there is also, plenty of research shows that it's just not really a market product. And in order to support that value, a community model really makes a lot of sense. But there just needs to be, and we're ready for something more. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this model. But otherwise, we're expanding all sorts of other partnerships as a way to continue to sort of reinvest in say digital infrastructure in ways that we need to support the work we're doing with Open.
So if Roger, if I can jump in, and I'll put on my my hat from working with annual reviews right before joining CERN and working on the Subscribe to Open program. And I mean, I think the reality is for most publishers with multiple journals is that you have there are some journals that make money and that are revenue drivers, and that those may even generate a surplus that's in excess of, you know, like what some people might think is reasonable for a nonprofit publisher to make. But the truth is that for a lot of those kinds of publishing operations, particularly the nonprofits, anything like the revenue gets reinvested into the publishing program, and it helps support the development and exploration of new journals, and which also tend to have investment costs that take about 7 years to recoup. And so there are journals across portfolios that are kind of like the financial winners, and those help support journals that are either new or maybe journals that do need to exist, and there's a need for them in the community, but that might not have a large enough market to generate any kind of surplus and may actually be losers. But I think the key element in all of that is trust and transparency. And I think one of the great things about nonprofits like Annual Reviews is that they've always been very open and honest and transparent in the way that they work with customers, and I think it's key. And Sara, I'll ask her to talk a little bit about the radical transparency approach they're taking with supporting these two actually quite important and I'd say like relatively expensive titles to convert to open, that I think that the trust that comes with transparency is something that, at least in my experience, libraries are up for paying more, so long as they have a clear understanding of the way that the money that they are spending is being used. And so, I don't want to speak on behalf of the library community as a whole, not being one, but at least my experience is that there are levels of surplus that librarians are comfortable with, just so long as the trust is there in this relationship. And that's why I think, particularly what's happening at PLOS around this radical transparency that they're approach they're taking is the key in building that kind of trust and to enable the support of these kinds of models.
And I'll just add, since what we're building is something that's going to support multiple models and multiple programs, we are consulting with the publishers, editors, whoever it is we're working with, to encourage them to build in, everybody has a different name for it, margin or what have you. We're calling it a sustainability fund. We're encouraging them to build in at least, 10, 15% is what we actually encourage more than anything, to on top of what they need to just recover their costs. Because the people who are coming to us, they're saying, this is how much it costs exactly. They don't understand necessarily that there are, whatever services they might be using to pay for might have annual increases. They're not building those in. They're not necessarily predicting multiple years into the future. They're saying, we just need this much money right now. And we're trying to consult with them to help them learn how to build a business model that is sustainable for them, and then be able to communicate that back out to the library community through, we're not calling it a prospectus, but the idea, it's just like a mutual fund where you can go in and you can look at all of the whatever criteria that libraries might be looking for, especially around sustainability. They want to know that what they're investing in lasts for a long time. We're not just doing this for one time. This is a shift, a transition to a new way of supporting scholarly publishing in those publishers in which we trust, right? And that we see a strong impact in the entire community, not just locally. So that's what we're doing to try to encourage sustainability, is taking what we learn as an organization and from our libraries and understanding that, just like as at home, we want more than just being able to pay just for that week's groceries. We need to be able to be sustainable and grow and be able to contribute in an organization or publisher sense. That means being able to have some freedom to be able to reinvest, to innovate, especially as researchers are changing how they're wanting to publish, and how do we keep up with what they need as well. So it's all a lot of communication across all of the stakeholders and educating all of us as we go.
Super. Thanks all for those really helpful thoughts. It's interesting. I feel like I have heard some library leaders say things like, I would rather keep that capital here with me to decide where to reinvest than, turn it over to someone else. But as several of you said, it's all about the trust, isn't it? So a question came in from Don Waters, who is really going to ask us to shift our attention from the revenue side to the cost side. And I think that's a really great point. And I'll read his question. I think that's the best approach here. So Don writes, a terrific session. Thanks for the thoughtful presentations. Extending Roger's question, collective action here has been defined as in terms of revenue generation models. Several speakers alluded to ways of increasing efficiency and other kinds of changes beyond the forms of generating revenues for publishers. PLOS has certainly brought to life some changed conceptions of journals that push down the cost of publication. I think that's referring to PLOS One, among other things. Moreover, there are publishers not represented here, like UNC Press, that are experimenting in the humanities with stripped down digital first products that lower the costs of traditional monographs, make open access more affordable. These are great observations. There's evidence that other forms of digital publishing that make use of digital data and modeling are actually increasing the costs of publishing. And I think certainly in the STM space, I can say this without any question, there's all sorts of new mandates and requirements. Can the speakers say more about how they envision using collective action models, your models, to influence and change the costs of publication and not just generate revenue?
I have an answer.
Go.
I feel so strongly about this because it's born out of need. I really appreciate Don's question and how that was formulated. I feel that so strongly. We're going out to the community and asking, help us cover cost. Short of like giving you a list of like, this is how much our heating bill is, and this is how much pencils cost, right? Short of doing that, which I don't think anybody wants to wade into. It is incumbent upon us, certainly from a nonprofit side, to in good faith tell anyone partnering with us that we are engaging really thoughtfully and prudently around what we spend, right? And so one of the things that I think is a critical collective action effort is not so much an offering to libraries, but is stakeholders within the community collectively acting around shared open infrastructure. And that means paying your bit to make something like OA Switchboard work, paying your bit to make, whatever community organized effort is out there, such that each publisher is not then building things independently in silos, whose costs we then transfer to our partners when it comes time to pay the bills. So a very simple kind of example of this, a number of libraries have asked us, particularly in the US, well, can you just can you just syndicate and push to us our content, your content, so it ends up in our repository, right? And that was a common request that a lot of libraries had for subscription publishers, justifiably, right? They had institutional repositories, they had mandates on campus, you had to deposit. Our content is natively OA. We never really did that. Every library now, quite a few, are asking for it, and they're really surprised when we push back and say, let me tell you how much that costs. Let me tell you the volume of content you're going to get when you're dealing with a journal like One. Let's talk about corrections. Let's talk about versioning. That is super expensive to maintain. Do you want to pay for it? And every library goes, oh, no, it's fine. Like we get, like that makes sense. We get it, you know, and having a really frank conversation. Now, though, I will say, I turn to every single one of those libraries and goes, we are trying to work with OA switchboard. It's possible OA switchboard may be a mechanism where we build one thing once and everyone gets what they need because they're participating in that. So in my mind, I can rant about this because I'm so excited that there's going to be a central thing that's going to save us money and time. I think that kind of collective action is really important. Particularly around the smaller players, the nonprofits, the societies that are just, we don't have the, you know, 2,000 person production team to pump out the kinds of deliverables that libraries have come to expect from, you know, our larger commercial colleagues. So that's, I think, an example of collective action to reduce cost and facilitate collaboration. That's important.
Yes, and I think it's not just, we need to think about communities of practice here, and that the communities of practice are not just the librarians that are, you know, that are making the decisions for funding. There are a whole slew of stakeholders out there that have always been giving money into the publishing, whether they're capital F funders, you know, departments, they've always done that. It's not new for us to be thinking about the multiple stakeholders within open access. So collective action isn't just about those who are giving the money, though. We see this in consortia all the time. With consortia, yes, there's a, you know, the buying club kind of mentality that we're reducing costs, that we're negotiating certain terms, but there are some consortia that do what they call deep collaboration, where they're actually reducing costs for the group they serve by centralizing, you know, catalogers, having one cataloger, having one scholarly communications librarian for all of them. I would love to see publishers doing this more. It's not just in the models that we build where we can save money. It's also in how we function. And we need to work together more. It's not just the libraries who need to be coming together as consortia. I would love to see the societies doing more together in deep collaboration to try to reduce the costs, and any other, you know, the small scholarly publishers where they don't have 2,000 person teams to be able to do things, but they have the knowledge, the skill set, and the diversity as one unit to be able to come together and do something that is common across all of them. They have their unique aspects about them, and we want them to maintain that for diversity of scholarship. But there are some common things they all do, and that maybe that's where they can reduce costs. The models that we're all talking about, by participating, the funders that around the revenue, if we're participating in that way, they also have ability then to provide feedback. This is how we can improve things. Asking the questions, you know, we've been paying it this way for so long. What if we think of something else? We've come up to that question, oh, well, it's because it costs this much. Well, then what can we do to maybe to reduce that cost? Mm-hmm. So it's all connected. Even though we're collective action around the revenue, it's really a community of practice that's forming.
Yeah, just to agree and support that, and just in addition to sort of add the perspective from books, which really are, you know, the models do share a lot of things, but at the same time, books have their own particular needs, and book authors, you know, if you're talking about sort of cost reduction, when an author publishes a monograph with MIT Press, there are all manner of things that they expect in terms of marketing, the branding that goes along with it, and all of that. We, in order for our acquisitions editors to continue to be able to acquire books, they have to be able to assure their authors that they will be treated the same whether the book is open access or not, and that is an incredibly important factor. So sort of cost reduction, yes, but you know, to some degree we have to do a revenue comparison, because that's how we know we're sort of keeping standards the way that they are at the moment in serving our author community. So as Sharla says, like considering, you know, scholars as part of that community of practice, even though we're taking the cost burden off them.
If I could just add just one general observation, which is that if you look at, so we all, you know, we're all kind of familiar of some of the market forces that have dominated scholarly publishing and the oligopolistic control that the big five have exercised. It's interesting if you kind of have a broader just look at the trends. It does seem that, you know, there's this increasing realization that at least content is going to move to open, and there's this kind of inevitability around it in a way. But what is happening in that space is there's a lot of corporate acquisition around publishing services happening. And that's something that I think everyone needs to be a little bit wary of, because perhaps that's going to be the next front where they're going to be making their profits is in the services space. So I think the points that my fellow panelists have been making are really well taken. I think the OA Switchboard is a really good example of a global initiative that will deliver services for institutions around the world and for publishers, that is going to be collectively funded. And then there's other efforts like Invest in OA Infrastructure, a number of different collective action efforts that are going on to create alternatives to these corporate systems. And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be on the lookout for, and to think about supporting, just so that we don't take our eye off the ball, and before we know it, we're stuck in another situation where publishing is controlled on the service side by profit maximizing entities.
Well, thanks everyone for answering that question. I mean, I know we're at time, and I'll just perhaps close this this question by saying that I think there's so much more we as a community can do to think about cost mitigation, cost reduction. And when I think about collective action on the cost side, and this is where you'll hear me more as a critic, I think of some of the collaborative open initiatives that didn't really go anywhere and resulted in an awful lot of resources that were squandered. And we don't have to agree that we don't have to believe that the commercial publishers are a good use of resources to recognize that under the guise of collective action, we've sometimes not made the best use of community resources either. So Don's question is really, really well taken, and I really appreciate the discussion here. Perhaps we'll be able to continue it, but I know we're right at, or maybe even a minute or so after 5 o'clock Eastern, so I want to thank the panelists for their participation. Turn things back to Clifford and Diane.
Thanks, Roger, and to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for really spirited, interesting, really fascinating conversation about these issues. And thanks, Dawn, for that wonderful question. And as we are past time here, I will go ahead and close down this session again with sincere thanks to our panelists and to all of our attendees for joining us here today. Thank you so much. I hope we'll see you back at CNI sometime over the next week or two. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.